Hi guys. Welcome to. We had we've had some technical difficulties, of course, but like took up 15 minutes, so we won't like eat into that. Welcome to this episode of Conversations with White Allies. Today we have different people with different points of views, all very outspoken, and all pretty much have are very vocal about what's been or have opinions and very thoughtful opinions about what's been going on in the state of unrest in the country and all over the world pretty much. And so we brought them all here today to have a open and honest conversation and a dialogue with them. We are live, so we took some questions and comments that some of you guys had, and we'll ask those or bring those up later on in the discussion. But right now, we'll get into that. Brandon is here. He's co-hosting this with me today. We're just moderating and we're just moderating. So it's pretty much a conversation with our lovely guests, and they'll be talking to each other and asking some questions. I guess we can get into like the first thing. Introduce yourselves, what it is that you do and what's your mission, because each of you guys do something pretty great in your lives, like on different levels.
Well,
So
before they get into that, I just wanted to thank them for being on as well. Being that you guys are doing this for us, I appreciate you guys coming on. We're just here just to more so guide the conversation, but we want to hear from you and hear from everybody else who might be watching on Facebook Live or we did ask questions, like you say, days prior, and these are going to be difficult conversations, right? But we need to have them. So we appreciate you guys for being willing to have these very difficult conversations. And with that said, please introduce yourself. Absolutely.
I'll go first. I'm just so excited. I can I know how to unmute. That makes me very, very excited. First off the bat, I have. First off, I'm so honored to have been asked. Number one, so thank you, Jen, and thank you, Brandon. And I think my connection is with. It started with Brandon many, many, many years ago when Brandon was 11 years old. I'm a writer-producer. I was an actor when I first came out to California. And I've been fortunate enough to be a writer-producer for my entire career. And Brandon was one of the stars of a show that is nearest and dearest to my heart because it was probably the best thing that my partner at the time and I ever did. And it was the Gregory Hines Show. And Brandon played his son. That's a whole story, which I'll go into it. You really want to hear the story later. But I then have since been very lucky enough to have met Jen through Brandon. And we have been trying to sell a project that is also near and dear to our hearts, which I'll happily talk about later as well if you want to hear it. But that's my connection, and that's me.
Hi, I'm Sarah Sandman. Most of the loved ones in my life call me Sandman. Someday I think my mother and I are going to change it to Sandwoman. I am an artist, designer, and educator, and activist. I'm the head of design for a media company called Wait What, and also the co-director of a public performance art project called Brick by Brick that builds human walls against misogyny and Donald Trump.
Hi, I'm Allison Koffler, and I was really surprised to hear from Jen. I'm her high school teacher, and I hadn't heard from her since, I'm not going to say how old I am, but the last time I saw you, Jen, you were like 18, 19 or something?
I think 17.
17. So I was really happy and honored that she called me. I'm a retired high school teacher. I'm a poet, and right now I work part-time for the New York City Writing Project as a teacher coach in a small high school in the Bronx. that exists to serve the needs of Spanish-speaking immigrant students. I asked her, I guess I sort of felt funny about being asked because I'm not, I mean, I know people who are direct action activists and stuff like that, which I try to show up when I can, you know, but I'm not hugely politically active. But I think most of my life, you know, I've been a teacher working with students of color and, you know, thinking a lot, you know, about how to be in that role, you know, and how to, you know, just be honest and be the best person I can be, and to be the best teacher I can be for my students. So that's me.
So I'm Andrew Myers, and I've been known as Mr. Wronghouse. I had a odd break into my house that turned into a viral video that turned into a charity for veterans, and it's generally to help them assist in getting the legislation switched over so that the VA supports service animals. And so that's sort of like what I've been doing. I sold a company and I have a marketing company now, and that's sort of where I try to put my time. But what's interesting is, I guess my vantage point here is that growing up in Indiana, I played basketball rather than the other sports, and I pretty much existed in a black hierarchy. I mean, I was the white kid at a black table, and when I joined the military, there was a time when I had a black president, I had a black command sergeant major, I had a black first sergeant, a black staff sergeant. 5 out of the 10 people in my unit that were the same age and rank as me were black, and the other ones were Mexican and Asian. There was like 3 white people around me. And when I think about veterans and when I see people give so much respect to veterans, I think about black people. These are the people who I served with. So anyways, that's sort of, hopefully my vantage point on the situation, and a brief summary of who I am.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. My husband is an active member of Veterans for Peace, and he had a similar experience in Vietnam. You know, as a squad leader. Working with, you know, being as a kid from Westchester, being, you know, thrown in with a group of African-American guys, and, you know, this very similar thing.
Oh, okay. Can you guys hear me?
We hear you.
Yeah.
That
So
was a great introduction.
yeah, those were great introductions, and I just wanted to ask you guys, what has made you either, if you are some of you are very strong advocates for civil rights and you know, equal rights for Black people and like all people, and some of you are just very like opinionated. What has made you guys so vocal and so passionate about a race, frankly, that's not yours, or just vocal in general about like issues that may not necessarily affect you directly?
So I can touch on that and hopefully help frame this a little bit. I've always been upset when I see things that happen that shouldn't happen. I guess that's part of the framing for that. But I have never been able to separate something that happened to a different person as their problem. And maybe that is just like an empathy thing in the way I was designed. But to me, the reason that I get mad when Black people are oppressed is because I'm mad on behalf of my country and on behalf of my own personal ideals about what I think is best for the country. I think some people look at it like Black people should have a fair shake, and that's gonna really hurt me in some way. I'm gonna pay for that, but I should let them in. You have to understand, if somebody's winning the game of Monopoly, they don't want to change the rules. I don't view it that way. I view it as, when I was a kid, I understood that, like, the way I saw America, maybe naively, maybe even incorrectly, was that everyone had the opportunity to come here and be part of the experiment. There's a lot less of that and welcomed than I had realized, but wow, I was already born here. What a head start. I didn't see it as I was born here like white being a head start. So to me, the rules of the game that I've understood since I was a kid are not the actual rules. And I think that's what a lot of people are understanding, that the teachers who did such a good job of putting these ideals in their head were not the ones in government. And so I think what I want is a world that's built on the rules that the social agreements that I thought I had already made. And so it's got really nothing to do with even having empathy for somebody else's plight. For me, it's just about being correct and looking back on what I said and what I did and what I thought, and not having an inaccurate view of things. And for as much people hover, helicopter mom the Constitution, I think it's pretty clear what what it meant, what it said, and what it meant to people who were disenfranchised reading it as a young person. And I've got a lot of criticism for saying, like, if certain things aren't going to happen, bet your ass you're going to see my ass kneeling too. And there's a reason for that, and it's because I stand proudly because of a certain set of ideals. And if those ideals are not what's on the table, then the pride is diminished and the anger replaces it.
Thanks, Andrew.
Awesome.
I'll jump in. Oh, sorry, Brandon. Do you want to add something?
Oh, no, I was going to say, please jump in. So, yeah, absolutely.
So, my mother instilled a lot of my values, but let's be clear, there's a lot of learning for me to do. So much learning for me to do, so much listening for me to do. I grew up in St. Louis, extremely segregated, went to a public high school. Black kids were bussed in from the city. And when you were younger, that means you weren't in the same neighborhood to play after school and on the weekends because they'd have to go home. And so it was very clear from the beginning, we might be in school together, but there's not social activities. Sports, there was the crossover, right? Once we all started to be able to drive, that's when we'd start to commingle, but our parents weren't driving us back and forth. Obama's election was huge for me. I was really involved in that election. The thing where my learning really happened was after grad school, I got a job in the South Bronx as a design professor. It's how I know Genesis, Ostos Community College. And, I want to be really vulnerable here. I think I came into that with a white savior attitude. I really do. And it was once I was in the school and I realized I was the authority and yet I was the minority. And so those were the conversations I would start every class with my students. Let's acknowledge that I knew with my teacher how to get into a private art school. I knew that. A lot of my students had never heard of the Rhode Island School of Design. And so thinking about the access that I had to even be in that position of power was something that I showed up to work with every day. And I'm still learning. Like right now, this awakening that's happening in the world, right? Listening to my Black friends, and this is the same with Donald Trump, the same after Mike Brown and Eric Gardner. It's like, yeah, hello, people. Hello, welcome, white people. Welcome. Oh, hello. Now you're woke. Welcome. But I think with that, as we get in the streets, as I'm in the streets today, it's also like, no, my best friend and I are starting the Me and White Supremacy book by Layla F. Saad tomorrow. I need to look inside right now. If I'm going to keep showing up outside, I need to look inside and look at all the layers of white supremacy and patriarchy that have, particularly white supremacy, that have, I'm not going to say patriarchy benefited me. Obviously, that's not the case. How white supremacy has benefited me, even if I was born into it. At 16, at 1619, my whole ancestors benefited. And how do I fit into that sliver? So if I'm going to show up in the streets, I better know that. I better understand where I'm benefiting.
I'll go from there because I can jump on the idea of I got I believe my ideals from my father specifically, although my mom was a more quiet, passive member of that. My father, at a very young age, for me, really taught me right from wrong. I've been doing as much posting as I can when I find things that really strike me. My dad was very much involved in Harrisburg with civil rights from a young age for him. And he helped form a place called the Hamilton Health Center, which was way before its time in Harrisburg. And Harrisburg, by the way, is a very, it is racially diverse, and it has always been that way. But growing up, I can also say that, I grew up in a very Jewish neighborhood with only a couple blocks separating all of us from each other. I mean, it was called Little Israel. That's what the area was called, funny enough, growing up. And those people are still, people I grew up with. But he really did instill in me values that, to me, I've lived with my entire life. And by the way, having been older, being an older guy, I've gone through so much as I look back on my life. When I was 12, that's when Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were both killed, which was, I was young enough to know when John Kennedy was killed, which was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And then Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, and I've gone through so many of these moments, and I found a great post that somebody shared, and I thought, I'm not that old, but I can totally relate to it, which is two old people with a sign, people basically in their 80s, and it said, "How is this possible that we're this age and we're still protesting the same shit?" By the way, we're allowed to swear, I'm assuming. Why not? Thank you. And it's really, really true. It's easy enough to give it a lot of this, but you really have to put your not only your money where your mouth is, but you have to put, you have to become more active. And I hopefully have been that, because growing up, again, the same thing. I grew up, I played, when it was in a public school, I played basketball my entire life. I was certainly around my black teammates. There wasn't as many. We had a couple Jews, a couple black guys, not a lot of white guys. That was our makeup. And so that's what I grew up in. But this has been incredibly eye-opening, this particular moment in our history for me, because it's not just, and it doesn't feel in a good way like it's just, let's just do this for a week. We'll make our statement and then we'll go on our lives, because this is the moment, I think, that change is crying, is crying out to be made and to be had finally. So that's kind of my insight as of today.
It's probably a good place for me to come in too, because I kind of grew up in that real change of mentality that happened during the 60s. I was a teenager at that time. And my parents also, I think a lot of my convictions about right and wrong come from my parents, who were very much involved in stuff then with civil rights and with the United Farm Workers and, other things like that. It was also kind of, I think I also thought about the other a lot growing up. My parents were a mixed marriage. My father was Jewish. My mother's half Italian and half Filipino. So they had a fair amount of struggles in their young life, around various kinds of prejudice. And I think it gave them this idea that they wanted to kind of create a world around them where that wasn't the case. And I know that growing up, I had a lot of friends, and they had a lot of friends who were people of really varied ethnicities. My mother is always really happy, sometimes in a way that kind of scares me. She'll catch somebody in the elevator and say, "Oh, you're from Turkey," and the person will back off, like, "Oh my God, are you an FBI agent or something?" But, just this really passionate interest in other cultures and other people. So I think I kind of grew up surrounded by that. At the same time, and not feeling quite white. At the same time, I'm very aware, that my coloring and, the assumptions that people make looking at me, allow me huge amounts of privilege. So, that's kind of an odd, it's something that I've thought about my whole life, but, growing up, I don't know that I felt like a white kid. I have cousins who are brown,
Thank you, Allison. Thank all you guys. It's amazing to see the different stories, right? And how you guys all became such strong advocates for Black people and the things that we go through. And I want to say, whatever brought you here, right, mentally, and whatever brought you here, I thank you. Jen thanks you. Because we need more and more, like you guys to be advocates and allies, for us. And that kind of goes to my next question. There are some Black people out there that feel like no matter what, all white people hold some sort of racism or prejudice. Do you guys think that's true? And what are your thoughts on that overall? I feel like everyone does have some prejudice to them, but specifically, I do know that is something that a lot of Black people feel about white people, that they're inherently racist. What do you guys think about that?
I think everybody has a side of that for every race, for short people, tall people, and I think anyone who tells you they don't is lying, flat out. They're just not telling the truth. But what I think really matters the most, because I've seen this, and I've seen people I've known that had interactions with Black people that would claim those interactions meant they couldn't be racist. What matters is not how negative you are to Black people or to white people or to short people, because you can be negative, you can have negative experiences, and that's going to influence the way you see things. What matters to me, and I think a better system to judge, is how capable are you to have a ton of empathy and compassion for a person of that difference. And if you have this other ability to really love a section of that audience, then I think it sort of disproves that you're corrupted, right? But regardless of how racist you are, if you can't have empathy, if there's a shut wall for you for certain types of people, and you just can't appreciate those people, then that's the form of racism that everybody needs to call out. There's certain things we all watch that maybe we don't like, but they're not going to be moments where we need to use our voice. But when somebody lacks the ability to produce empathy for another type of person, I'm more interested in that than their ability to say something really racist in a heated moment because it'll hurt the other person. People are dumb. They say dumb things, where they attack anything they can when they're mad. So I feel like it's the wrong cue to judge somebody based on the worst thing they said. I'm more interested in the other side of the spectrum. What have you done? If a person in need was there, would you change the way you'd mentor somebody or come along? Like if you filled out a Big Brother form and found out that the little kid you're going to help was going to be of this other race, would that change how you'd feel about helping them? It's that side of the coin that I feel like you can best judge whether or not there's a problem with somebody's racism, because we all have it, and it's all just based on our experiences more than it is our skin color. We all know plenty of people who the most racist things come out of their mouth. Genesis, I saw you just post about that today. A person that religiously says things that are some of the most racist things you could say, and just hides behind the fact that he's Black to say them, right? So it's not your race that predicates the way you see the world. And it really just comes down to, can you empathize with other people or not? And if you can't, then you need to be called out in a way that'll make it hard for you to live in this society. So the last segment was all about the last segment was basically all about the past. I think the next part of this conversation has to be about the future. And if there's one role that white people can play well, it's to call out other white people. But if we're going to be honest, the change is going to happen on Black people. The verbs are going to come from Black people. We can play lead blocker. But we've got a lot of conversation about some actions that Black people need to take on their own to improve this situation and to lead their own narrative, because there's plenty of counter narrative out there, and it's and these I think are the more important parts of that conversation.
And if I may, Andrew, what would you say are some, when you say, that's interesting, when you say that white people can play lead blocker, right? But it's up to us Black people to kind of I guess you say help change certain narratives that are out there. Do you have like an example or kind of?
Well, let me give you one
in mind when you say that.
Well,
yeah.
In fact, I do.
Okay.
All right. So obviously, Black Lives Matter is in reference to the idea that a Black person being killed won't be investigated, not a Black person dying. Black Lives Matter is never about, hey, a Black person was killed. Never has been about that. It's about, will there be justice for a Black person that was just killed? And only when the perception exists that there won't be justice does the question, Black Lives Matter, come up. And so the entire thing makes sense. But we don't consider as a movement that there is a counter movement that's always there ready to pounce. And Black Lives Matter was clearly a stupid thing to say, because they would intentionally conflate it to not saying all the other lives matter, right? We got to know in a fight that we're going to hit and somebody's going to hit back. We're not hitting a boxing bag here. So I've been saying for a year and a half that we should have ditched Black Lives Matter the moment they sent infiltrators in and started hijacking the message. Should have said, fine, like a paintball game, we'll take your base. All lives matter with a question mark. Should have been the movement all along. So this is what I mean about being on the verb front. Do all lives matter? Okay, you spent a year and a half saying that, bucko. So do they? Because then where do they go? So part of a good chess move is understanding the thing that's going to happen next. And so, yeah, I have a good many examples of things that Black people could do within their own community. Obviously having mentors that know how to act is a big one. I don't want to grab the mic for the whole first part of this whole thing, but understand, like you said, you have an example of how to control narrative or understand counter narrative. Just the hashtag thing is part of it. If you have a hashtag that's been conflated, get the hell out of there. If you had start a new one, jump on theirs, but understand that it's going to be a two-way battle. And just because, and when I say white people need to play a lead blocker, that means on other white people, to give Black people the space to have a voice that's not just muddled out by odd resistance, logical fallacies and whatnot, right? So, but it doesn't mean that they need to necessarily be part of the movement. But Black people cannot just break shit and wait for shit to change. And the list of demands that's been produced has always been incomprehensible from my view. It gets laughed at. This is a problem. I've seen defund 50% of the police from Michael Moore. These are not things that are going to happen. What needs to happen, and people are going to not like this, but it's personal accountability. It's back to that like right-wing message. We need to make people understand that the change has to happen in the Black community in order for the Black community to see change, and that all the rest of this is just a oxygen in the room where they have a moment to do that. And it doesn't matter if people break shit or there's riots and they make things harder. What matters is in that space of opportunity, did something happen? Was there a coalition built? Was there a set of ideas put forward that everybody could agree on? Did the idea become sellable? Because trust, if it doesn't, and it's not only an idea, but an idea that understands what the reaction to that idea will become, you know what I mean? If there's not a comprehensive plan, then we are just breaking shit. And, it's nice to say, this feels different. We're just going to break shit for a longer amount of time, and it'll be different only in that way. Until there's a coherent set of this is how this is gonna change.
All right, Andrew. I am going to counter you and think that and absolutely think that we can defund the police. And I absolutely believe that going in the street messages can be heard. One example of that
not to cut you off, I want to hear what that is, but not a tweet that says defund the police, because you have to know your audience. And that's more my message, is understand narrative. I could totally fall for a full-fledged argument for how to achieve it, but we have to be careful shouting that into an open room where 80% of the people go, what? That's all I meant.
Okay, so yes, but we still need headlines and then bullet points. Okay, so yes, a lot of us are saying defund the police, and then you want the bullet points. What we mean by that? What we mean is diverting that money into education. I have friends that are working on budgets majorly here in New York City, trying to figure out how we're going to cut that budget. Big lobbying efforts from the NYPD. Not going to like this, right? But we've got Scott Stringer, our comptroller, hearing this happening and proposing to the mayor $1 billion cut. They've got a $12 billion budget. It's nothing, but we can shift that money into programs that benefit education, food security, right? It's a shifting of it. So defund the police. I understand. Maybe you don't like that.
Reallocate the police budget would be a better. But some people have called for 50%. That's a $6 billion cut.
That doesn't energize people, right? Like you have to go for the strong sorry, I'm energized. You have to go for the strong message that people go, oh, defund the police. Maybe that's exactly what we want people to do. Oh, you can't do that. And we'll say, okay, let's tell you how. But now I have your ear because you just got freaked out because I just said defund the police.
Yeah, I hear you, but I think it's undervalued how much progressives trying to scare people with how progressive their message headline was is fucking everything up for those of us in the middle. But I mean, but yeah, I'm with you.
I'm sorry, Allison, if you don't mind, real quickly. It is fascinating and in a good way. Here's what I just scribbled down a couple things because there was so much good stuff being said. One of the things we got to back up because the original question was, do you look at yourself as having ever been racist? And it dawns on me that the definition of the word is it's a scary thing because if you said to me, are you racist? I would say, no, and I never have been. However, to deny the fact that as I've grown up from a kid into a teenager, into a young adult, into an adult, have there been to those times where I have walked at night and looked and seen a black guy coming towards me or a couple guys or whatever and going, uh-oh, in your head. Now, is that racist? Yes, to an extent, of course it is. There is a part of that. And that, I don't think any of us can deny has not been part of our growing up process, our process of being human, number one. But this, and so it leads me to this defunding the police part, which I think is fascinating. Because again, when I first heard the words defund the police, my first thought was, well, the definition struck me. I didn't know what that meant. I thought what it meant was, wait a minute, are we actually saying we're going to take all the money away from the police department? That's kind of crazy. It's not what it means. So again, it's the definition. Just like a racist has, it goes from white supremacists down to good human beings who have made that at some point of their existence, have made that moment where they've gone, okay, shit, that was a little bit, I shouldn't have done that. I was awkward enough. That. Well, the same thing goes with the funding. Doesn't mean taking away everything from the police department, but it sounds like it does. And I think that's why it becomes a hot button. It sounds like we're saying, take money away from the cops. But when you look at what we're asking and what is being asked, and you have to do the research, and it's as our friend Wendell said to me, it's the royal you, not the you have to. It's all of us. We have to know what it means. And then we have to look at it and we have to open up our eyes and go, what are we asking? And truly, the only way we're going to make a difference, I do believe now, is to find ways to reallocate. And I think that's what Sarah said. I think it has to be something where, because I think ultimately, and it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen quickly, God knows, but it is going to happen if we can figure out ways to get where the problem really is. Where is the genesis? How about that? Just for you, Jen. Where is the genesis of the problem? Where is it starting? Where did it start? Where did it start? We know the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. That's got to change, or we're really going to screw ourselves up even worse. So that's my 2 cents.
When you say the genesis, you kind of bump into that. Who punched who? Oh, they shot my cousin. I shot their cousin, and it never stops. And that's why
I'm going to jump in because I didn't get to answer the question really quick. Sorry. I feel like I just responded to you, Andrew, earlier, and I didn't actually get to say my definition of the question. And then I want to give it to Allison.
Yes, I was going to say that.
I was going to pass the mic because I just responded. So I have to leave in 12 minutes to go to an action in my community. But I did want to say, yes, all white people, if they're benefiting from white supremacy, which we are, that there are, in the scariest part, there are inherent biases that we haven't even seen yet if we haven't done the work. They are, just like you were saying, that fear, like there's ones, they're microaggressions we don't even know. That's the scariest form of racism. But I believe we all have them if we are benefiting from this society. Allison, pass the mic.
Yeah, I guess the defund the police thing, I think there are going to be all sorts of ways to communicate with all sorts of people about what to do. I mean, for one thing, this is such a pluralistic culture. I mean, I don't think there's any one way to get the message across. And I think, movements are being made towards defunding the police. There's movements being made towards demilitarizing the police. I mean, it's absurd that police, should have basically weapons of war rolling into the streets. I mean, and it's not a big jump to think, well, of course that money could go to social programs, to kids, to poverty, to hunger, and that those things are the things that really have an impact on communities, that really make people's life better. I mean, I think it's hideous that, when you think about the institutions in the society, how many of them are punitive? Schools drift towards the punitive. The military is punitive. So many aspects of government are punitive. Boy, I went off on a limb there. But,
Well, you talked about the equipment. I don't know that the equipment is even the problem, because a lot of that's given to them by the military. It's the training hours that they invest becoming proficient with that equipment. That's the real misallocation of the funds. And if you talk about defunding the police, I'd like to keep their budget the same. But do you realize, I saw this thing today that in Seattle here, it takes less hours to become a police officer than it does to become like a nail tech. If we just made them spend more on a police officer, this is a person who's educated, who understands the job, and not just, a dude in a hat. So to me, I don't so much care about the money, but the police have to be trained in a better way of interaction. When we talk about microaggressions, cops don't even know what that word means.
It's a historical question about who the police are there for. Are they there to defend property? Are they there to defend people in the neighborhoods? I mean, it's sort of interesting to.
I've got a few friends that are cops, and I'm telling you, they're not more educated than any other random person out of a crowd that you could grab about the nature of law. And that's what they need to understand, law, more than anything else. But yeah. So the other problem looking forward is like, the interaction is the problem. You guys want to make this stop. People in the streets because of a bad interaction. So if there's a systematic problem, and we all have our own angles on that. But the way to confront that bad interaction is better trained police officers that understand de-escalation. Everything you were saying, it's just put the money into training them instead of just sending them out into the streets. So it's, like I said, it's a reallocation of the budget rather than it is getting rid of it. But it also happens that with
+1 on training.
Could I return to that original question about racism? Also,
yeah. Go ahead.
I think it's impossible to be a white person in this world and not to have some streak of racism in you. I mean, if anything, just because you're benefiting without even thinking about it.
Well, the idea you have to be white to be racist is not one I agree with, but we're all racist.
Can I talk about the training? Yes, absolutely, on training. Go ahead, Allison. Did you want to finish something?
Yeah. Except, I have, this is difficult.
And then I'd love to talk in the training. Go ahead.
I lost my train of thought.
I apologize.
No, that's okay. Go ahead. I'll come back. Permit me to interrupt you a little later.
Okay. Maybe what I'm saying will trigger that. So, yes, definitely training for sure. Take away budgets on AK-47s. Absolutely, 100%, Andrew. We also on training, absolutely, nail techs often have more training. We need de-escalation techniques. What we also need in law enforcement is women cops. Women cops get pushed out, that I know, that is a very patriarchal structure. And so we need more women cops that are protecting our communities as well. These are community protectors. These are not military service members. They are community members, and we need more representation as women as well, period.
I agree with that.
And I just want to jump in real quick before you have to go, Sam. And this is like really great, and just being a fly on the wall and listening to this conversation and the points that are made. Like, I'm also here to learn and observe and everything like that. My question before you, this was like, I was going to ask this later, but, because, I had technical difficulties, I'm going to just ask this question right now. And I think Brandon might, have something also that he wants to say, but I want to start with you, Sandman. And then I guess I'll go Sandman, Allison, Andrew, and Nat, if we could do that. When white people are around other white people, and they see, like, they witness some sort of racism, what should they do? And what have you done? Like, what have you done in the past? If you could speak to that, is it, you know, and if you have done something, you know, how do other white people respond to you with that? So that's my question, and yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you call it out every single time. And I ask that my friends call me out every single time. I just had it with, I will not name this person's name, but they were dropping an emoji in their Slack to represent them that was a Black person emoji that wasn't them. Called them out. Another friend uses the word powwow. We don't use that shit anymore to talk about gathering. Cut it out. I was writing something for a wedding speech. My friend said, "You sound like you're a white savior talking about that." Call me out. Keep calling people out. My dad wears a t-shirt with Snoop Dogg on it, and he's a 65-year-old white man, and it's like very strange that he's not like acknowledging the culture. Call him out. Call him out, and plus have the conversation so it's not just finger pointing, and it's like, and here's why, and here's why, and here's why. And so, because otherwise, if you're just like pointing, people are gonna keep retreating. But you have to be vulnerable. I'll pass the mic.
Yeah, I think you can't let stuff go, and it's difficult for me because I'm a shy person and I'm not a confrontational person. But you know, just to not let things go. You know, when Uncle Joe says all that crap at Thanksgiving dinner, you know, call him on it. I mean, and you don't have to be unkind, although sometimes you do have to be unkind, but just don't let it go and be aware and be questioning yourself all the time. You know, am I representing as I should at this moment? You know, I think it's really important. It's difficult, but it's important.
I would never, I try not to speak up. Obviously, you guys know, a lot of people who know me for speaking up. I would use the word intervene because it more implies a situation that requires intervention. I feel like the progressive instinct to do the right thing is commonly unbalanced by their misunderstanding of the opponent, who's ignorant and doesn't even know what they're doing, and it makes them easily mocked. And so there's certain times when people do things where, man, it takes 8 paragraphs to explain to them what they did wrong, and they're not going to proofread more than the first one. So you just have to go, man, I'm like, you know, there's going to be people who are going to say things not because they care about those things, but because they know they'll get a reaction. There are people that are that hollow. And so, like, I try to imagine different scenarios. You know, if I'm at a pizza place and somebody walks by and says something dumb, if the person doesn't look in any way wounded about it, this is not my situation to intervene in. You know what I mean? And if they are wounded, be a shield. That's it.
I think we live in a society that's getting more and more polarized every day. I have very rarely in my life, I think that Allison said it best. Yes, the generation above me, the generation that came from a whole different world. That my uncle, I had an Uncle Joe too, funny enough, an Uncle Gil. Those uncles, that's very different, and they say something that's in their minds not racist, but that in fact is. That's easily called out. It is, because it's somebody you love, somebody you know is not wise enough, or not, you know, they're not.
And there's no victim there either. You're course correcting a person mid conversation.
Right, and the truth of the matter is, I compare it to people who are, and again, sorry, Trump supporters. I couldn't be further from that. There's no talking to them. We are learning, sadly, that people are locked into a belief system that you cannot change.